The water is 74 degrees Fahrenheit. That sounds warm. That sounds survivable. What they don't tell you is that 74 degrees, when you're submerged in it for hours with no insulation, no fuel in your body, and no way out, 74 degrees will kill you just as surely as the North Atlantic. It just takes longer. And the longer it takes, the more time your mind has to process exactly what is happening to you. James Michael Grimes hit that water sometime around 11 p.m. on November 23rd, 2022.
Is anyone there?
No. He was unconscious when he went in. He doesn't know
Not
why.
a soul.
He doesn't know how. What he does know, what became the defining knowledge of the next 22 hours of his life, is that when he opened his eyes, there was nothing. No ship, no lights, no sound except the movement of the Gulf of Mexico pressing against him from every direction. The Carnival Valor, a vessel carrying over 3,000 souls, was gone, and not a single one of them knew he was missing. Think about that for a moment, because I need you to really sit with the weight of it. A man falls overboard from a major commercial cruise ship. The ship has cameras, motion sensors, trained security staff, and a family of 18 people who boarded with him. And for the next 12 hours, not one alarm fires. Not one protocol triggers. The Man Overboard system, the MOB system, the last line of defense between a passenger and the open ocean, it never activated. We'll come back to that, because the reason it didn't is more disturbing than you might think. But before we get into the anatomy of that failure, I want you to understand who James Grimes is, because this case lives or dies on what kind of man was treading water in that darkness.
I'm here.
James was a construction worker.
Open the door.
Not a Navy SEAL. Not a survival
What is it?
instructor. A construction worker from Georgia, 40 years old, built wide and strong from years of physical labor. He was on a Thanksgiving cruise with his
You are
family.
not going to believe what happened.
18 people. His 9-year-old
you would
daughter
say
was on
that.
that ship. He just won a
We're
free
so thankful
drink
to be
in an
here.
air guitar
You know how the
competition an
joke
hour
goes.
before he went into
Dad,
the water.
You're the funniest.
That detail matters more than it sounds.
Just wait until you
He
hear the
wasn't drunk.
punchline.
He's been clear about that. He had one drink. Something happened between the moment he left his sister to use the bathroom and the moment the ocean received him. Blackout. A medical event. A stumble at a railing that wasn't where it should have been. The official record on what caused the fall remains, to this day, incomplete. And that ambiguity, that missing 30 seconds of his life, is something James has had to learn to live with. Because it means he will never fully know how close he came to not existing at all. When he surfaced, the first thing he registered was the absence of light. Not just darkness, a specific, absolute darkness of open ocean at night, miles from the nearest shore. If you've never experienced that, let me describe it. There is no horizon. The sky and the water merge into a single black mass, and you are a point of heat inside it, invisible and unlocatable. He could feel the current pulling at his legs. He could taste the salt beginning to coat the back of his throat. And somewhere in the distance there was no distance at all, just darkness in every direction. There had been a ship. He started swimming, not toward anything. There was nothing to swim toward. He swam because stopping meant sinking, and sinking meant dying, and James Grimes had decided, with a clarity that he later described as almost mechanical, that he was not going to die in the Gulf of Mexico. His daughter was 9 years old. He was not going to die in the Gulf of Mexico. Now here's where I need to pull back and show you the physics of what was happening to his body.
I will not give
because
up.
this is the part that most people don't think
Keep
about when they
moving.
imagine surviving a situation like this. And it's the same framework we applied when we looked at the Nutty Putty Cave case. The way an environment doesn't just threaten you physically, it begins to systematically dismantle your ability to make rational decisions. The Gulf of Mexico in late November sits at roughly 74 degrees. Your body's core temperature is 98.6. The ocean is continuously drawing heat from you. After the first hour, your muscles begin to lose efficiency. After 2 hours, fine motor control starts degrading. After 4 or 5 hours, you begin to experience mild confusion. The medical term is mild hypothermia. What it means in practice is that the thing keeping you alive, your ability to keep swimming, to make decisions, to not panic, is being eroded by the very environment you're fighting to survive in. The ocean is patient in a way that human beings fundamentally cannot be. He found the jellyfish somewhere around the 3rd hour. He didn't see them, it was still dark, and the Gulf was black around him. He felt them. A sharp, electrical sting across his right calf. Then his thigh. Then his left forearm. Then his face. He had drifted into a bloom, what marine biologists call a swarm, and they were wrapping around him in the dark water, their tentacles finding every exposed inch of skin. Each sting hit like a burned wire dragged across flesh. He couldn't see them. He couldn't avoid them. He could only swim through them, each stroke an act of controlled suffering, until the density of the bloom began to thin. The welts were already rising across his body. By morning, the combination of those welts and the sun reflecting off the water would become their own separate torture. But that wasn't even the strangest part of what the ocean threw at him that night. Somewhere in the early morning hours, after the current had pushed him through 3 or 4 distinct temperature zones that felt, at the time, like walls, he saw a fin. 4 meters away. He froze in the water, which is exactly what you're not supposed to do. The Gulf of Mexico has one of the highest concentrations of bull sharks in the Western Hemisphere. Bull sharks are not the cautious, probe-and-retreat predators of popular mythology. They are aggressive, they thrive in warm, shallow water, and they have been responsible for more confirmed unprovoked attacks on humans than almost any other species. James knew about Gulf sharks. He'd grown up near the water. He knew. He forced his head beneath the surface and opened his eyes in the salt water. The shape was below him, and to the right, large, flat snout, moving in slow, deliberate arcs the way things move when they're deciding. He kicked hard and screamed into the water. The shape turned and dissolved into the dark. Whether it was a bull shark that chose to disengage, or something else entirely, James could not say. What he could say, what he told investigators afterward, is that for the next 2 hours, he didn't stop kicking. Not once. Because whatever had been in the water with him knew exactly where he was. Let me bring you back to the ship. Because while James was fighting the ocean, something was unfolding on the Carnival Valor that tells you everything you need to know about how maritime passenger safety works and where it breaks down. His sister had noticed he was gone.
My daughter isn't here. You have to
Not
check
when
the
he
cameras.
didn't come back from the bathroom.
All right, ma'am, calm down. What is the
She'd
name and
given
room
him
number
time.
again?
Maybe he got
Anya
pulled
Jensen,
into
room
another party. Maybe he found a poker game. It was Thanksgiving on a cruise ship, and there were people everywhere. She waited, and then the waiting shifted from patience into something colder. She reported him missing to ship staff. By that point, James had been in the water for hours.
He just disappeared.
The ship had continued on its scheduled course,
Dispatch, I have a
adding
missing
miles
person on
between
deck
the hull
6. Need
and the
immediate
point where he went
response.
over. The Coast Guard was contacted. An official search was launched. But here is the protocol question, the same question I always come back to in these cases, the same question we had to ask about the pressure management failures in the Byford Dolphin incident. Why didn't the ship know in real time? Modern cruise ships are equipped with Man Overboard detection technology. Camera arrays, thermal imaging systems, sometimes acoustic sensors.
The camera feed
Carnival
cuts out
Valor
right here.
had
We have a total
systems.
blind spot.
But
Check
those
the deck
systems
6 cameras
require
again. Maybe the angle
activation,
is wider.
maintenance,
Negative. It's
and
blocked by the
critically,
structure. I'm
the right
reporting
set of
it.
environmental and positional conditions to trigger reliably. A man going over a railing on a lower deck at night, in a position where the camera angle is partially obstructed, falls through the gaps. Literally and figuratively. The maritime industry has known about this gap for decades, and yet the gap remains. Because the cost of closing it completely, or retrofitting every aging vessel with redundant, sensor-fused mob detection, is a number that competing interests have consistently decided is not worth paying. Until it is. Until it becomes a body in the water at 11 p.m. on Thanksgiving night, and a family of 18 people waking up the next morning to find one of their own is simply gone. When the sun came up, James had been in the water for approximately 7 hours. He was sunburned within the first hour of daylight. The Gulf sun at that latitude is not forgiving, and his skin had been saturated with salt water all night, removing every trace of natural oil and protection. The welts from the jellyfish were inflamed and hot. His muscles were at roughly 40% capacity. He had been treading water, not floating, not drifting, actively treading for 7 hours. He was beginning to hallucinate at the edges. Not dramatically. Not visions. Just a subtle softening of the line between what was real and what his dehydrated, hypothermic brain was constructing to fill in the gaps. He found a piece of wood in the water. Or bamboo, he wasn't sure. It was floating, and it gave him something to grip, something to reduce the muscular load on his legs, and something to do with his hands. He chewed it. Not because he thought it had nutritional value. He knew it didn't. He chewed it because his body was sending starvation signals his brain couldn't override, and having something in his teeth interrupted those signals just enough to keep him functional. He invented songs and sang them out loud into the open water. He thought about his daughter.
I am here.
He recited her name. He constructed mental images of her face and held onto them with the deliberate focus of a man who understands, at a cellular level, that the moment he stops having something to hold onto is the moment he starts to go under. This is what extreme isolation does to the human mind, and it's a dynamic we've analyzed before in this channel when we looked at the psychological deterioration patterns in long-duration cases. The brain is not designed for featureless environments. When there is nothing to look at, nothing to listen to, no external input to process, the brain begins to generate its own content. Some of it is useful, the singing, the mental imagery of his daughter. Some of it is not. The gulf became, in James's telling, a kind of negotiation. He made deals with the water. He apologized to it. He thanked it when the current shifted in his favor. He was 20 hours in, and the ocean had become, in some functional neurological sense, the only relationship he had left in the world. The Granolero, the bulk carrier, appeared at 8:25 p.m. on Thanksgiving Day. He saw it before they saw him. That's the thing that gets me every time I read through the incident reports on cases like this. The survivor always sees the rescuers first and has to somehow signal across that gap with a body that is nearly spent. James started swimming toward it. He was burning his last reserves. His arms weren't working correctly. He could feel the dissociation between the signal his brain was sending and what his muscles were actually producing.
Almost there.
That terrifying delay that tells you the system is shutting down. Someone on the bulk carrier's deck saw movement in the water. They looked. They looked again. And they called it in. They threw a life ring. The current pushed it away from him. They threw it again. The current pushed it away again. James was losing ground. He could see the ring. He could not reach it. One of the crew members shouted to him that the Coast Guard was coming. That it would be 15 minutes. James has said in interviews that those 15 minutes felt like a separate survival event entirely. Like the ocean, knowing it was about to lose him, made one final attempt. The Coast Guard helicopter arrived. The searchlight swept the water. It passed over him twice before locking on. A human head in open ocean at dusk after 22 hours is a very small thing to find. He pulled off his socks, his pants, his underwear, and waved them above his head. The searchlight found him. He heard a sound from the helicopter that he described as the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. A crew member's voice amplified, cutting through the noise of the rotors and the water. They put a rescue collar around him. He'll himself go limp inside it. Every muscle in his body stopped at once, like a machine that had been running past the operational limit and finally received permission to quit. He was treated for hypothermia, severe dehydration, jellyfish envenomation, and second-degree sun exposure. He survived. Fully. He is alive and walking and has talked publicly about what happened to him.
I'm just tired.
With a composure that I find remarkable given that composure was the
here.
exact resource the Gulf of Mexico spent 22 hours trying to consume. The investigation that followed identified the mob detection gap as a systemic failure, not a malfunction. A gap. The Carnival Valor systems did not fail in a mechanical sense. They operated within their design parameters. The parameters were simply insufficient.
The camera coverage gap on deck
The International
7, Sector
Maritime
3
Organization has
critical
updated guidance on mob
the geometry
detection
shows
technology
a direct path
in the
where a
years
fall
since.
would go unnoticed.
But as of this recording, the retrofit of existing vessels remained voluntary. Not mandatory. Voluntary. The same word that shows up in investigation after investigation, in industry after industry, whenever the question of whether a safety upgrade is required comes down to whether it will affect the bottom line. We've seen this pattern before. We'll see it again. James Grimes fell into the Gulf of Mexico on Thanksgiving Eve and was pulled out 22 hours later by people who had no reason to find him and every statistical reason to miss him. The probability of locating an unequipped, non-signaling human being in open ocean after that duration, in those conditions, is a number so close to zero that maritime rescue professionals don't like to say it out loud. He is the exception that the math says should not exist. And the reason he exists, the reason he is alive to tell this story, is not the technology, not the protocol, not the system that was supposed to catch him before he ever hit the water. It's the fact that James Grimes decided, in the first 5 seconds he spent floating alone in the dark, that he was not going to stop moving. That his daughter needed him to not stop moving. And that the ocean, patient and vast and utterly indifferent, was going to have to keep trying. It kept trying for 22 hours. It didn't win.